German Shepherd saves human baby. On a cliff, what happens next will shock you. If you're watching this incredible true story that will change how you see loyal companions forever, drop a comment letting us know where you're from. The morning air hung heavy with an inexplicable heaviness as Sage Morrison stirred from her sleep. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. The usual warmth of her bedroom had been replaced by a bone-chilling draft that seemed to seep through the walls themselves. Her German Shepherd Atlas, usually peaceful at this hour, paced frantically near the back door, his nails clicking against the hardwood floors in an urgent rhythm that made her heart race. Sage had always trusted Atlas's instincts. In the 3 years since she'd rescued him from the shelter, he'd never steered her wrong. But this morning, his behavior was different. His muscles were tense, ears pricked forward with an intensity she'd never seen before. His golden eyes kept darting between her and the door, carrying a message she couldn't quite decipher. The clock on her bedside table read 5:43 a.m. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, casting eerie shadows through the trees that surrounded their isolated mountain home. As she swung her legs out of bed, the floorboards creaked beneath her feet, the sound echoing through the unnaturally quiet house. That's when she noticed it. The silence. Her baby boy, Theo's room should have been filled with his gentle morning babbling by now. The monitor on her nightstand showed only static, its red light blinking accusingly in the dim morning light. "Theo?" Sage called out, her voice trembling slightly. No response. Atlas's whining grew more insistent. He scratched at the back door now, leaving deep marks in the wood. Sage's heart began to pound harder as she made her way to Theo's nursery, her bare feet growing colder with each step on the wooden floor. The door to the nursery was slightly ajar. She always kept it firmly closed at night. Her hand shook as she pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. The room was bathed in a strange bluish light from the pre-dawn sky. The mobile above the crib spun slowly, though there was no breeze. "Theo," she whispered again, approaching the crib. The blankets were rumpled, but the space where her 8-month-old should have been was empty. The sheet still held the indent of his tiny body, and it was still warm. Sage's world tilted sideways. She grabbed the crib railing to steady herself as the room began to spin. That's when she heard it, a sound that would haunt her dreams for years to come. A baby's cry, distant but clear, coming from somewhere in the forest behind their house. Atlas barked sharply, the sound jolting her into action. She ran to the back door, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. The door's lock was mangled, deep scratches surrounding it, as if something with immense strength had forced its way in. But what terrified her more were the muddy prints on the floor. Tiny bare footprints, impossibly small, leading from Theo's room to the door. Alongside them were other prints, larger ones that didn't look quite human or animal. The morning air hit her like a physical force as she yanked the door open. Atlas bounded out immediately, his powerful body moving with purpose toward the tree line. The forest beyond their property looked different somehow. Darker, more ancient. The trees seemed to lean inward, their branches reaching like gnarled fingers toward their house. Another cry echoed through the trees, closer this time. But there was something odd about it. Something almost artificial, as if it were being played through an old speaker. Atlas stopped at the edge of the forest, looking back at her with an urgency that made her blood run cold. The ground was wet with morning dew, and Sage's bare feet sank slightly into the mud as she followed Atlas. The prints continued here, leading deeper into the woods. Theo's tiny footprints looked fresh, but something about them was wrong. They were too evenly spaced, too purposeful for a baby who couldn't even walk yet. The forest seemed to close in around them as they followed the trail. The branches overhead grew thicker, blocking out what little morning light had begun to filter through. The air grew thick with an unfamiliar scent, like wet earth mixed with something metallic and ancient. Atlas stopped suddenly, his entire body going rigid. Ahead of them, through the dense undergrowth, Sage could make out a clearing she'd never seen before. The tree line ended abruptly at a cliff's edge, and there, silhouetted against the lightening sky, was a sight that made her heart stop. A small figure sat at the very edge of the cliff, its back turned to them. Even from this distance, Sage could recognize Theo's blue pajamas, the ones with little stars that glowed in the dark. But he wasn't alone. Around him, drawn in the wet earth, was a perfect circle of those strange, clawed footprints, as if something had been pacing around him, watching, waiting. As Sage took a step forward, a twig snapped beneath her foot. The sound seemed to echo unnaturally through the forest. Theo's head turned, but the movement was too smooth, too controlled for a baby. And when he faced her, his eyes reflected the dawn light like mirrors. Sage's scream died in her throat. Those weren't her baby's eyes. They were empty, glassy, like polished silver coins catching the first rays of dawn. Her maternal instinct screamed at her to run forward and grab her child, but something deeper, more primitive, held her back. Atlas's low growl confirmed her fears. Something was terribly wrong. The air grew colder, and a strange mist began to curl around their feet. It moved against the wind, twisting and writhing like it had a mind of its own. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, not even the sound of the wind. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath. From the shadows between the trees, yellow eyes began to appear, dozens of them, watching, waiting. The eyes belonged to coyotes, but they were unlike any Sage had ever seen. Their bodies were gaunt, almost skeletal, with matted fur that seemed to absorb the morning light. They moved with an unnatural synchronization, emerging from the darkness like ghosts. "Theo," Sage whispered, her voice shaking. "Baby, please." Her son's head tilted at an impossible angle, and when his mouth opened, the sound that came out wasn't a baby's cry. It was deeper, older, like the groaning of ancient trees in a storm. The circle of footprints around him began to glow with a faint, sickly light. Atlas moved forward, positioning himself between Sage and the approaching coyotes. His hackles were raised, and his normally gentle eyes blazed with protective fury. The largest coyote, a monster of a creature with a scarred face and mismatched eyes, stepped forward. Its movements were jerky, puppet-like, as if something else was pulling its strings. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Small stones and leaves skittered across the earth, moving toward the cliff's edge, as if drawn by an invisible force. Sage watched in horror as the dirt around Theo's feet began to crumble. Her baby still hadn't moved, his silver eyes fixed on her with that terrible, empty stare. The lead coyote lunged without warning, its jaws snapping at Sage's throat. Atlas intercepted it midair, his powerful body colliding with the creature in a blur of fur and teeth. The sound of their collision echoed through the forest like a thunderclap, and the battle began. Atlas fought with a ferocity Sage had never witnessed. He was outnumbered, but something about him had changed. His eyes glowed with the same strange light that surrounded Theo, and his movements were impossibly fast. The coyotes attacked from all sides, but Atlas seemed to anticipate their every move, his teeth finding their marks with deadly precision. Sage began to inch toward Theo, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. The ground was unstable, small pieces of the cliff breaking away with each step. Behind her, she could hear Atlas fighting for their lives, his snarls mixing with the unnatural howls of the coyotes. "Mama's comin', baby," she whispered, though the thing wearing her son's face showed no recognition. The silver eyes followed her movement, and with each step she took forward, the glow around the circle of footprints grew stronger. She was just a few feet away when she heard it. A sound like breaking glass coming from deep within the earth. The ground beneath Theo began to crack, spiderweb fissures spreading outward from where he sat. His expression finally changed, a terrible smile spreading across his tiny face, revealing teeth that were far too sharp for a baby. The lead coyote, bleeding but still fighting, suddenly broke away from its battle with Atlas. It charged toward Theo, its intentions unclear but certainly malevolent. Atlas, though exhausted and wounded, launched himself after it. The three of them, Atlas, the coyote, and whatever was pretending to be Theo, converged at the cliff's edge just as the ground gave way. Sage screamed as she watched her baby, her dog, and the creature disappear over the edge. She threw herself forward, her fingers clawing at the crumbling earth, desperate to catch any sign of them. The remaining coyotes howled in unison, a sound that made her bones vibrate and her vision blur. And then, through the chaos and terror, she heard something that made her heart stop. A real baby's cry, echoing from somewhere below the cliff's edge. The cry pierced through the unnatural silence, and this time Sage knew. She knew in her heart. It was really Theo, not the thing that had been sitting at the cliff's edge, but her actual baby. The sound came again, weaker this time, mixing with the pained whimper of a dog. Without hesitation, Sage began scanning the cliff face. About 20 feet down, a thick gnarled tree root jutted out from the rock wall. There, hanging by his teeth from the root, was Atlas. His fur was matted with blood, but his grip was firm on what he held, the real Theo, crying but very much alive, dangling from his pajamas, which were clenched carefully in Atlas's teeth. The remaining coyotes gathered at the cliff's edge, their yellow eyes fixed on the dangling pair. But something had changed in their demeanor. The supernatural synchronization was gone, replaced by what looked almost like fear. They backed away from the edge, whimpering, their gaunt bodies trembling. Sage's mind raced. She needed to get to them, but one wrong move could send both Atlas and Theo plummeting to the rocks below. The root looked sturdy, but she could see it starting to crack under Atlas's weight. Her brave dog's eyes met hers, pleading, exhausted, but determined. Moving quickly but carefully, Sage shrugged off her robe. She began tearing it into strips, her hands shaking but purposeful. The fabric was old but strong. It would have to do. As she worked, she became aware of a new sound, a deep rhythmic thumping that seemed to come from within the cliff itself. The forest around her was transforming. The trees seemed to twist and bend, their branches reaching toward the cliff like desperate hands. The ground continued to tremble, and in the growing morning light, Sage could see strange symbols beginning to appear in the dirt, ancient markings that glowed with the same silver light that had been in the fake Theo's eyes. "Hold on, Atlas," she called down, quickly knotting the strips of fabric together. "Just a little longer, boy. Hold on to him." Atlas's whimper was barely audible over the increasingly loud thumping from within the cliff. Sage could see his muscles trembling with the effort of holding Theo's weight. The baby had stopped crying, but his tiny hands were reaching up, trying to grab Atlas's fur. As Sage began securing her makeshift rope to the sturdiest tree she could find, she noticed something strange about the symbols appearing in the ground. They were forming a pattern, spreading outward from where the fake Theo had sat, creating what looked like a massive spiral. At its center, the silver light pulsed in time with the thumping sound. The coyotes had retreated to the tree line, but they hadn't left. They sat in a perfect semicircle, watching. Their eyes no longer glowed yellow. Instead, they reflected the silver light of the symbols, creating an eerie constellation of metallic points in the shadows. Sage tied the last knot and tugged hard on the rope, testing its strength. The thumping grew louder, and she could feel it in her chest now, like a second heartbeat. The air had become thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. Dark clouds were gathering overhead, swirling in an unnatural pattern directly above the cliff. As she prepared to lower herself down, something caught her eye. In the dirt near where the fake Theo had sat, something was emerging from the ground. It looked like a stone, but it was unlike any stone she'd ever seen. It was black as night, but seemed to glow from within, pulsing with that same silver light. Ancient markings covered its surface, identical to the ones spreading across the ground. The stone rose further from the earth, and as it did, the thumping sound reached a crescendo. The clouds above began to spiral downward, forming a funnel that reached toward the cliff. Atlas let out a pain-filled bark, and Sage could see that the root was beginning to give way. She had to make a choice. Try to grab the stone that seemed to be the source of all this strangeness, or ignore it, and focus solely on saving her family. The clouds were nearly upon them now, and in their swirling mass, she could see faces forming and dissolving, ancient and terrible. Atlas's grip slipped slightly, and Theo let out another cry. The sound snapped Sage out of her hesitation. The stone, the symbols, the clouds, none of it mattered. Only her baby and her loyal dog mattered now. She grabbed the makeshift rope and began her descent, even as the world seemed to be falling apart around her. But as she lowered herself down the cliff face, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever force had orchestrated this entire nightmare wasn't finished with them yet. The thumping had become a roar, and the silver light was now so bright it hurt to look at. Above her, through the swirling clouds, she caught glimpses of something massive moving, something that had been waiting in this place for a very, very long time. The cliff face was slick with morning dew and something else, a strange, oily substance that seemed to seep from the very rock itself. Sage's bare feet struggled to find purchase as she lowered herself down. The makeshift rope creaked ominously with each movement, the strips of her robe stretching under her weight, 10 feet down. The roaring had become deafening now, but beneath it, Sage could hear Atlas's labored breathing. Her brave dog's muscles were shaking visibly, but his grip on Theo remained firm. The baby had gone quiet, his tiny hands still reaching upward, his eyes fixed on Atlas with complete trust. Another 5 feet. The silver light pulsing from above cast strange shadows on the cliff face, making it seem as though the rock itself was moving, breathing. In these shifting patterns, Sage began to see images. Ancient scenes of other mothers, other children, other tests. She blinked hard, trying to focus only on her descent, but the visions persisted. A sudden gust of wind slammed her against the rock wall, knocking the breath from her lungs. The rope swung wildly, and above her, she heard the terrible sound of fibers beginning to tear. Atlas whined urgently. He could see the rope fraying, could sense how little time they had left. The massive presence above them was descending through the spiral of clouds. Sage still couldn't see it clearly, but its shadow fell over them like a physical weight. The coyotes at the cliff's edge had begun to howl again, but this time, their cries sounded almost like words in a language too old for human ears to comprehend. 5 more feet to go. Sage could almost reach Atlas now, but as she got closer, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The root Atlas was clinging to wasn't just cracking, it was being pulled back into the cliff face, as if the rock itself was trying to swallow it whole. "Atlas!" she called out, her voice trembling. "Just a little longer, boy. I'm almost there." Her loyal companion's eyes met hers, and in that moment, something passed between them. An understanding, a promise. Atlas's gaze shifted briefly to the root, then back to her, and Sage knew what he was thinking. The root wouldn't hold them all. Even if she reached them, the added weight would tear it from the cliff face. A shadow fell over them as the presence above finally broke through the cloud spiral. Sage caught glimpses of it in her peripheral vision. Something vast and ancient, with eyes like silver pools and a form that seemed to shift between solid and mist. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and age-old earth. Then everything happened at once. The rope above her snapped with a sharp crack. The root Atlas was holding began to splinter, and the creature above them let out a sound that shook the very foundations of the cliff. Sage felt herself falling, the world spinning around her in a blur of rock and silver light. In that moment of freefall, time seemed to slow. She saw Atlas release the root, twisting his body in midair. His powerful legs pushed off the cliff face, launching himself toward her. Theo was still secure in his jaws, but now Atlas's trajectory would intersect with her own falling path. They collided in midair, Sage's arms wrapping around both her dog and her baby. The ground was rushing up to meet them, the rocks below promising a swift and brutal end. But something was happening to Atlas. The silver light that had been pulsing from above was now emanating from him, growing stronger with each passing second. His fur began to glow with an inner light, and Sage felt a warmth spreading through her body where she touched him. The world around them seemed to blur and shift, the very fabric of reality bending like light through water. The roaring from above had changed pitch, becoming something almost like singing. As they fell, Sage caught one final glimpse of the massive presence above them. It was clearer now, a being of pure light and shadow, its form constantly shifting between shapes both beautiful and terrifying. Its countless eyes were fixed upon them, watching, evaluating, judging, and then, just as the rocks below were about to claim them, the silver light surrounding Atlas exploded outward in a blinding flash. Sage felt their descent suddenly slow, as if they were falling through honey instead of air. The light wrapped around them like a cocoon, and within it, she could hear whispers. Thousands of them, in languages she didn't understand, but somehow knew were telling the same story, over and over again. The story of a test, the story of sacrifice, the story of love that defied the very laws of nature itself. The silver light surrounding them solidified, becoming almost liquid in its consistency. Sage felt it cradle them, slowing their descent until they were floating mere inches above the jagged rocks below. In that moment of suspension, she could feel Atlas's heart beating against her chest, its rhythm perfectly synchronized with the pulsing light. Theo, still held securely in Atlas's gentle jaws, reached out and touched the glowing cocoon around them. Where his tiny fingers made contact, Ripples of gold spread through the silver light, creating patterns that matched the ancient symbols from above. The baby laughed, a pure, joyful sound that seemed to make the light shine even brighter. The massive presence above had descended further, its form now filling the entire sky above the cliff. Through the swirling light around them, Sage could finally see it clearly. It was like looking at a living constellation, countless points of light arranged in shifting patterns that formed and reformed, creating images that told stories older than time itself. At its center was a core of pure radiance, and within that core, Sage saw reflections of every parent who had ever faced this test, mothers and fathers from across the ages, each with their own loyal guardians, each facing the same choice, a choice that would determine not just their fate, but the fate of something far larger. The coyotes had gathered in a circle around them, their gaunt forms now more spectral than physical. Their eyes were fixed not on Sage or Theo, but on Atlas. The dog's fur had taken on a silvery sheen, and symbols like those on the mysterious stone were appearing in his fur, glowing with an inner light. "He has proven worthy," a voice spoke, though Sage couldn't tell if she heard it with her ears or felt it in her mind. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the massive presence above, from the coyotes, from the very rocks beneath them. The Guardian has chosen his successor. The fake Theo, the one that had sat at the cliff's edge, appeared before them. But now its form was shifting, revealing its true nature, a being of pure light, neither human nor animal, but something in between. It approached Atlas, and for the first time, Sage felt no fear. "For centuries, we have tested those who would protect this place," the being continued, its voice carrying the weight of ages. "The Guardian must be one who would sacrifice everything for love, who would defy death itself to protect the innocent. Your Atlas has proven himself to be such a being." The silver light began to pulse more rapidly, and Sage felt a gentle force lifting them back toward the cliff top. As they ascended, she saw more spirits emerging from the rocks, from the trees, from the very air around them. Each one bore the same silvery glow, each one a former guardian who had passed the test in their own time. They reached the cliff top, and the light gently set them down on solid ground. The real Theo was still laughing, reaching for the swirling lights around them with complete wonder. Atlas finally released him into Sage's arms, and she clutched her baby close, feeling his warm, living weight against her chest. Atlas sat before them, his form still glowing with that otherworldly light. The being that had imitated Theo approached him, placing what looked like a hand made of pure light on the dog's head. Where they touched, the symbols in Atlas's fur glowed brighter. "The power of the Guardian passes from one to another, chosen not by us, but by the strength of their heart," the being explained. "Your companion has proven himself worthy of this sacred duty. He will protect not just your family, but all who walk these ancient grounds." The massive presence above began to recede, the cloud spiral slowly unwinding. The coyotes, too, were fading, their forms becoming more transparent with each passing moment. But before they disappeared completely, each one bowed its head to Atlas, acknowledging their new guardian. The mysterious stone that had emerged from the ground floated down to rest at Atlas's feet. Its glow now matched the light emanating from him, and the symbols on its surface moved in harmony with those in his fur. Sage watched in amazement as the stone seemed to melt, its essence seeping into the ground and creating a circle of softly glowing symbols around Atlas. But even as these wonders unfolded before her, Sage noticed something changing in her loyal companion. Atlas's eyes, while still filled with love and devotion, now held something more, an ancient wisdom, a deep understanding of the power and responsibility he had been given. He was still her Atlas, but he was also something more now, something eternal. The dawn had fully broken now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed more vibrant than any sunrise Sage had ever seen. The supernatural light was fading, but its effects remained. The forest around them had transformed. What had once been threatening and dark now felt ancient and protective, like a cathedral built by nature itself. Atlas rose to his feet, his movements fluid and graceful. The symbols in his fur had settled into a subtle pattern that was only visible when he moved, like ripples in still water. He padded over to Sage and Theo, touching his nose gently to the baby's forehead. Where they made contact, a tiny spark of silver light danced between them, and Theo giggled, reaching for Atlas's fur with complete trust. "Your home is now under my protection." Atlas's thoughts touched Sage's mind, not in words exactly, but in feelings and images that she somehow understood perfectly. "As are all who dwell within these boundaries. But I am still your Atlas, still your companion, that will never change." The ground beneath their feet had transformed as well. The destructive cracks from earlier were gone, replaced by a network of softly glowing lines that spread out from where they stood, creating a vast web of protection that stretched as far as Sage could see. These lines pulsed with a gentle rhythm that matched both Atlas's heartbeat and the deeper rhythm of the earth itself. As they began their walk back home, Sage noticed other changes. The forest creatures, which had fled during the supernatural events, were returning, but they behaved differently now. Squirrels paused in their gathering to watch Atlas pass, bobbing their heads in what looked like small bows. Birds swooped low over them, singing songs that seemed to carry echoes of the ancient voices they had heard. Even the trees seemed more aware, their branches swaying to make way for them, despite the lack of wind. Sage could have sworn she saw faces in their bark, not threatening ones like before, but wise, ancient visages that watched over their path with benevolent interest. Theo had fallen asleep in Sage's arms, his tiny face peaceful, but his hands still clutched Atlas's fur, maintaining contact even in sleep. The bond between them had deepened into something beyond mere friendship. They were now connected by something ancient and powerful, guardian and guarded, protector and protected. As they approached their house, Sage saw that it too had been touched by the transformation. The damaged back door had been restored, but now subtle symbols like those in Atlas's fur were carved into its frame. The entire building seemed to glow softly in the morning light, as if it had absorbed some of the ancient power and made it its own. Atlas paused at the threshold, his new awareness scanning their home. Through their connected consciousness, Sage could sense what he was doing, establishing protective boundaries, setting invisible wards, weaving a web of safety around their sanctuary. The air shimmered briefly as his power settled into place. Inside, everything looked the same, but felt different. The shadows were softer, more welcoming. The air was warmer, filled with a sense of peace that Sage had never felt before. She laid Theo in his crib, which now bore the same subtle protective symbols on its wooden frame. But as she turned to Atlas, she saw something that made her heart catch. While his form was still solid, there were moments when he seemed to shift slightly, becoming somewhat transparent. Through these brief glimpses, she could see other versions of him, past guardians whose essence now lived on through him. It was beautiful, but also somewhat heartbreaking, a reminder that her beloved pet had become something more than just a family dog. "Will I lose you?" she whispered, kneeling beside him and burying her face in his fur. She could still smell his familiar scent, but it was now mixed with something else, something that reminded her of ancient forests and starlit nights. Atlas turned his head to meet her eyes, and in his gaze, she saw both the loyal companion she had always known and the ancient power he had become. Through their connection, she felt his response, a wave of love and reassurance so strong it brought tears to her eyes. Through their mental connection, Atlas shared visions of what was to come. Sage saw glimpses of future moments, Atlas playing with Theo in the backyard, still very much their loving family pet, but now with an added layer of protection. She saw him standing guard over their home during storms, his power working in harmony with nature to keep them safe. She saw him teaching Theo to walk, his ethereal form somehow solid enough to support the toddler's first steps. But she also saw other things, deeper things. Through Atlas's new awareness, she witnessed the true nature of their mountain home. The land they lived on wasn't just a place, it was a nexus, a crossing point between the physical world and something older, something that had existed long before humans built their first settlements. The ancient presence that had tested them still lingered at the edges of their awareness, but now it felt more like a teacher than a threat. Through Atlas, Sage understood that what had happened wasn't just about protecting their family. The Guardian's role was part of a delicate balance, maintaining the boundary between worlds. As the morning progressed, they began to discover the extent of Atlas's new abilities. When Theo grew hungry, Atlas's symbols glowed briefly, and the kitchen filled with a warmth that somehow made the baby's bottle heat to the perfect temperature. When Sage noticed a small cut on her arm from the cliff face, Atlas touched his nose to it, and the wound healed with a soft silver light. But it wasn't just their immediate family that Atlas now watched over. Through him, Sage could sense others who lived within his protected territory. She felt the presence of hikers on distant trails, families in scattered mountain homes, even the wild creatures that called these woods their home. Atlas's guardianship extended to all of them, a web of protection that grew stronger with each passing hour. The most remarkable changes happened at twilight. As the sun began to set, the symbols in Atlas's fur grew brighter, and the air around their home filled with tiny points of light, like earthbound stars. These lights moved with purpose, patrolling the boundaries of their property. Through their connection, Sage understood that these were echoes of past guardians, working in harmony with Atlas to maintain the ancient protections. Theo was especially fascinated by these lights. As they floated through the nursery, he would reach for them with delighted giggles. The lights seemed drawn to him as well, dancing around his crib in patterns that Sage somehow knew were ancient blessings. When he finally drifted off to sleep, the lights formed a gentle canopy above him, a living nightlight that pulsed in rhythm with his peaceful breathing. But not all of Atlas's new duties were gentle ones. As night fell completely, Sage felt him tense, his awareness extending to the darkest corners of their territory. There were other things out there, things that belonged to the old world, but weren't as benevolent as the guardian spirits. Through their bond, she caught glimpses of shadows that moved against the darkness, of hungry eyes that tested the boundaries of Atlas's protection. These entities didn't dare approach too closely. The power of a newly chosen guardian was at its peak, and Atlas's presence blazed like a beacon in the spiritual realm. Still, he stood watch, his form shifting between physical and ethereal as he patrolled their home. The symbols in his fur would flare occasionally, sending pulses of silver light into the darkness, reminding any wandering entities that this territory was under his protection. Late that night, as Sage sat on the porch watching Atlas maintain his vigil, she noticed something extraordinary. The stars above seemed to mirror the pattern of lights around their property. It was as if Atlas's guardianship extended not just across the land, but upward as well, creating a dome of protection that reached into the heavens. As midnight approached, Atlas's demeanor suddenly changed. His ears perked forward, and the symbols in his fur began to pulse with an urgent rhythm. Through their connection, Sage felt what he sensed. Something was approaching, something that didn't belong to either the physical world or the spiritual realm they had glimpsed. The protective lights around their property began to move more quickly, gathering like a swarm of fireflies at the northern boundary of their land. Atlas rose to his feet, his form shifting between solid and ethereal more rapidly now. The air grew thick with tension, and Sage could taste something metallic on her tongue, like the atmosphere before a powerful storm. From inside the house, Theo began to cry. But this wasn't his normal cry. It was higher, more urgent, as if the baby could sense the approaching danger. Sage rushed inside to check on him, Atlas following close behind. When they reached the nursery, they found the protective symbols on Theo's crib glowing brightly, creating a barrier of light around the distressed infant. Through the window, Sage saw it, a tear in the fabric of reality itself. It started as a thin line of absolute darkness in the air, like a cut in the night sky. As it widened, she could see something moving within it. The entity that emerged was unlike anything they had encountered before. It wasn't malevolent like the shadowy creatures Atlas had been watching, but it wasn't benevolent either. It was something else entirely, a being of pure chaos, neither light nor dark, that threatened the very balance Atlas was sworn to protect. The entity took form slowly, its appearance shifting constantly. One moment it looked like a massive bird made of starlight, the next like a creature of living shadow. Its presence caused the air to ripple, and reality seemed to bend around it. The protected boundary of their land began to waver, the carefully woven strands of Atlas's guardianship straining against this new force. Atlas moved to the center of the nursery, his form solidifying fully. The symbols in his fur blazed with silver fire, and his eyes held the combined power of all the guardians who had come before him. Through their mental connection, Sage felt his determination. This was what he had been chosen for, the true test of his guardianship. The entity's attention focused on their home, specifically on Theo's room. Its shifting form settled briefly into something almost human-like, but with too many limbs and eyes that showed entire galaxies spinning within them. It raised what might have been a hand, and the protective barriers around their property began to crack like glass. But Atlas was ready. He threw his head back and let out a howl that shook the foundations of both worlds. The sound carried the power of every guardian through the ages, a call to arms that echoed across dimensions. The protective lights that had been patrolling their property rushed to his call, swirling around him like a cyclone of silver fire. The entity pressed against their defenses, and Sage felt the house itself groan under the pressure. Theo's cries had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. The baby watched the unfolding scene with unusual focus, his tiny hands reaching out toward Atlas as if he wanted to help. Then something extraordinary happened. Where Theo's hands reached out, golden light began to flow, mixing with the silver of Atlas's power. The combination created something new, a harmony of energies that neither the Guardians nor the Chaos entity had seen before. The symbols in Atlas's fur began to change, incorporating new patterns that pulsed with both silver and gold. The merging of energies created a shockwave that rippled through both worlds. The Chaos entity recoiled, its ever-shifting form momentarily stabilizing in what looked like surprise. The golden light flowing from Theo began to spread throughout the room, touching everything with its warm radiance. Where it met the silver of Atlas's power, the two energies danced and twined together, creating patterns of light that wrote new stories in the air. Through their connection, Sage felt Atlas's astonishment. This was something unprecedented. In all the long history of the Guardians, no protected child had ever contributed their own power to the defense. The ancient presence that had tested them earlier stirred once again, its attention drawn by this new development. The Chaos entity recovered from its initial surprise and pressed forward with renewed determination. It split into multiple forms, each one attacking the barrier from a different angle. The house shuddered under the assault, and cracks began to appear in the very air around them. Through these cracks, Sage caught glimpses of other realms, places where the laws of physics held no sway, where time flowed in all directions at once. But Atlas stood firm, his form growing larger, more majestic. The silver and gold light surrounding him took shape, forming the spectral figures of past guardians. Not just dogs, but wolves, lions, great birds, and creatures Sage had no names for. Each one added their strength to Atlas's defense, their combined power creating layers of protection that shifted and adapted to each of the entity's attacks. Theo, still reaching out from his crib, began to laugh. It was a sound of pure joy, completely at odds with the cosmic battle raging around them. His laughter seemed to carry power of its own, each giggle sending pulses of golden light through the room. Where this light touched the Chaos entity's various forms, they began to stabilize, as if the baby's innocent joy was somehow anchoring them to a single reality. The ancient presence manifested fully now, its massive form filling the sky above their home. But instead of intervening, it watched with what felt like fascination. Through Atlas's enhanced senses, Sage understood why. They were witnessing something that transcended the old ways, a evolution of the Guardian's role that had been waiting for precisely this moment. Theo's golden light and Atlas's silver power continued to merge, creating a new kind of energy that began to heal the tears and reality caused by the Chaos entity's presence. The spectral Guardians moved in perfect synchronization, their forms blending together into a kaleidoscope of light that surrounded the entity, not fighting it, but embracing it, transforming its chaotic energy into something harmonious. The entity's multiple forms began to coalesce, drawn together by the combined power of guardian and child. As it unified, its appearance settled into something beautiful, a being of crystalline light that reflected both silver and gold. The chaos within it wasn't destroyed, but transformed, becoming part of the balance it had threatened to destroy. Atlas approached the now transformed entity, his steps leaving paw prints of light on the nursery floor. The symbols in his fur had changed permanently, the original guardian patterns now interwoven with new designs that pulsed with Theo's golden energy. Through their mental connection, Sage felt him communicating with the entity, not with words, but with pure understanding. The entity bowed its crystalline head to Atlas, acknowledging something that went beyond the ancient laws of guardian and ward. It had come seeking to disrupt the balance, but had instead become part of a new equilibrium. As it straightened, its form began to dissolve into countless points of light, each one a perfect blend of silver and gold. These points of light drifted through the room like gentle snowfall, each one settling into the fabric of reality around them. Where they touched, they left behind tiny marks that looked like stars, permanent reminders of the night when the Guardian's power evolved into something new. The ancient presence above their home pulsed with approval, its vast consciousness acknowledging that the old ways had given birth to something unprecedented. As the last of the transformed entity's light settled, Sage noticed changes spreading throughout their home. The protective symbols that Atlas had established were different now, more complex, but also more alive. They didn't just guard against threats, they actively nurtured the space they protected, encouraging growth and harmony. Plants in their garden began to bloom out of season, their flowers glowing softly with mixed silver and gold light. Theo had fallen asleep in his crib, but even in sleep, he maintained a connection to the new power. Golden light continued to flow from him in gentle waves, mixing with Atlas's silver energy to create patterns that danced across the nursery walls. These patterns told stories, not just of past guardians, but of future possibilities, of a world where protection and growth, defense and nurture worked together in perfect balance. Atlas padded over to Sage, his form now permanently altered by the night's events. While he was still very much their beloved family dog, there was an added dimension to his presence. The symbols in his fur had stabilized into a new configuration, telling a story that had never been told before. When he looked up at her, his eyes held not just the wisdom of past guardians, but also the promise of something new. Through their mental connection, Atlas shared visions of what this change meant. Sage saw future generations of guardians, each one carrying this new combined power. She saw children like Theo growing up with a deeper connection to the ancient forces that shaped their world. The boundary between protected and protector had been forever changed, creating a partnership that would strengthen both. As dawn approached, the ancient presence began to fade, but not before leaving its mark. The very air around their mountain home had been transformed, becoming a place where the physical and spiritual worlds existed in harmony. The threatening shadows that had lurked at the edges of Atlas's territory were gone, not destroyed, but transformed by the new energy that now filled the space. Sage walked to the window, Atlas at her side, and looked out at their changed world. The forests that surrounded their home seemed more alive, more aware. The trees swayed with purpose, their branches weaving patterns that matched the symbols in Atlas's fur. Animals emerged from the woods, drawn to the new energy. Deer with starlight in their eyes, birds trailing silver and gold sparks as they flew, even the smallest creatures carrying a touch of the transformed power. Years would pass, and the story of that night would become legend among those who knew of the Guardians. They would speak of the German shepherd who not only passed the ancient test, but transformed it. They would tell of the baby, whose innocent joy changed the very nature of protection. And they would whisper about the night when chaos itself was transformed into harmony. But for Sage, Atlas, and Theo, it wasn't just a legend, it was their daily reality. Each morning, they would wake to a world where silver and gold light danced together, where protection meant more than just defense, and where love had proven strong enough to change the very laws of existence. Atlas remained their loyal companion, but he was also something more. A bridge between worlds, a protector who had learned that the greatest power came not from standing guard, but from nurturing the connections between all things. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the stars seemed especially bright, Sage would sit on their porch with Atlas beside her and Theo in her arms. They would watch the transformed entity's light points drift through their garden like fireflies, each one a reminder that the most powerful changes often came not from fighting against chaos, but from transforming it into something beautiful. In those moments, the boundary between ordinary and extraordinary disappeared, and they were simply a family, bound together by a love that had proven strong enough to change reality itself. The connection between earth and sky, between physical and spiritual, between past and present, it was all part of the ancient balance that Atlas now helped maintain.